You, born in Nairobi, you're an East African Indian. You made the move from Kenya to Britain where you studied. And then you made, that's quite a common move. I'm sure lots of people will know the East African Indian community. It's a community I'm part of as well. But then you made the move back to India, which is a more unusual step. And I wonder why you did that and perhaps more importantly, how it affected you as a writer.
For start, thank you all for being here. It's wonderful to be here. I guess there are two sorts of East African Indians. There are the third, fourth generation Indians who've lived there ever since their grandparents moved. But my parents actually moved there as expats. So I was born there, but I was the first generation in my family to be born there. And so when my parents retired, they moved back to India. And so it was personal reasons that took me back, family ill health and that sort of thing, but it also seemed like the right time to write. I was about 35 and I'd written before, at the age of 12, my first play, which was this incredibly worthy farce. I guess it was a farce. It was about multiculturalism and the importance of different religions, people of different religions all living together harmoniously.
Worthy farces about multiculturalism. There's plenty of them around these days, aren't there?
It was audacious, I suppose, but the thing is, it was also an incredible success, I'll have you know, because it was performed at 2 assemblies, I think, and at a parents' evening, and it kind of was talked about a lot. So it was a tremendous boost at a young age to become a writer. And then I wrote my sophomore effort, which was a second play, which I had a childhood obsession with Rasputin. So my second play was called The Mad Monk. And I expected it to go on to do even greater things, but, it sunk like a stone. My English teacher, I think, read it, and there was probably, a couple of kind words, and then it was stowed in a bottom drawer and never heard from again. So I didn't write anything for the next 20 years, at least. I mean, I think this is the kind of effect it can have on you in those formative years. So the time just seemed right. I moved to India. There was a story in my head, and I moved to a quiet place, Mysore, which allowed me to write. Nothing really happens in Mysore beyond 9 p.m. It's not a bright lights, big city kind of India that you hear about when you hear the India Shining story. It's still a sleepy city that actually feels more like a small town. Yes. So it was a good place to write, and I think as a writer you kind of have to find the right time to write as well. It just happened to be mine.
Smoke is Rising, set in Mysore. I wonder whether you might be able to read us a passage from it. So this is your first novel, published I think in 2014 in Britain and also in India.
So The Smoke is Rising is basically the story of a city over the course of a year. And the premise is that Asia's largest theme park is coming to the small South Indian city of Mysore. And, people would sometimes ask you, what's your book about? And I'd say, the premise is that Asia's largest theme park is coming to Mysore. And very often the response would be, oh, is it? Where would you know? Do you know who has the tender? And so it's
will it be open past 9 p.m.?
Yes, exactly, So all these very sort of specific factual questions, and it kind of reminded you that how close fiction can be sometimes to fact. So this is the beginning of the chapter which introduces the concept of this theme park, which is called Heritage Land. Venki Gowda had only ever sustained one vision in his life: Heritage Land. He dreamed of a world where cutting-edge technology could harness the drama of the ancient epics and transport his compatriots to an alternate reality. When he slept, he twitched and kicked, mouthing his plans for a recreated Dandaka forest, where the curious could follow in Lord Rama's footsteps, battle the Lankan army in an elaborate flume, cut off Shurpanakha's ears and nose with laser arrows, soar to the treetops in a mechanical Garuda. His cupboards were crammed with notes for a Kurukshetra war simulation involving luxury chariots and a buffet service. Napkins within his reach were covered with doodles of the Kailash Wonder Mountain and the Yamraja monorail. Venki's first attempts at obtaining finance for the project had been met with blood-curdling laughter. Had he considered the problem of locating a site, the cost of construction and equipment, the logistical difficulties, the power shortages, the possibility that heritage land would only attract roadside Romeos, feverish at the thought of witnessing the dishabille of a shapely Draupadi? These were all legitimate points, but Venki Gowda only had one vision, and he was not the type of man to turn his back on it. After years of conspiring and toadying, endless feasibility studies and costs analyses, an MBA from Ohio State University, a rhinoplasty procedure, and finally marriage into the family of a powerful political grandee, his phantom fantasy world faced the prospect of becoming real. Perhaps the gods had finally decided to bless Venki, themselves waking up to the fact that their universe would be incomplete without a representation of their fight against evil in the twists and turns of a waterslide. And that representation would rise in Mysore, erstwhile land of Maharajas, India's second cleanest city, and home of many talented snooker players. Venture capitalists from Hong Kong were ready with finance. Architects and engineers worked day and night on the park layout. And crucially, opinions had been canvassed among prominent Mysore residents. The editor of the Mysore Evening Sentinel gave the project a cautious welcome. It would be a good opportunity to showcase the country's traditions and culture, but historical and doctrinal accuracy would be essential. Ahmed Pasha, president of the Mysore Enterprise Forum, could see only benefits accruing from heritage land. He speculated at length on the growth in the city's economy based on projected revenues from the theme park, but also took the opportunity to publicize the fine merchandise in his own furniture showrooms. Priyadarshini Ramesh, proprietor of the Mystique chain of beauty salons, and Mystique is spelled M-Y-S-S-T-I-I-Q-U-E, proprietor of the Mystique chain of beauty salons, declared that she was not opposed to the plans on principle, but her main concerns related to the park's aesthetic impact on the city. Class, not mass, she said, stamping her beautifully pedicured foot. We don't want the whole thing turning into a cheap circus full of low types. Professor M.M. Mallikarjuna of the university's linguistics department ignored the question entirely and instead renewed his appeal for better policing on the university campus in light of the number of youngsters openly canoodling there in broad daylight. An overall impact assessment of heritage land resulted in the following conclusions. The theme park would bring enormous economic and cultural advantages to the city of Mysore, transforming it into a premier global tourist destination. Any adverse environmental impact would be mitigated by the planting of trees on the park site and by the use of low-energy light bulbs. No obstacles could be envisaged in the grant of licenses required for the park, as all necessary inducements would be incorporated into its unofficial budget. The residents of Mysore, or in any case those who held any serious influence, would provide full support for the project as long as it was realized in the best possible taste. A celebration party was held at the Mysore Regency Hotel, where all the guests agreed that the head chef had outdone himself with his Hyderabadi chicken lollipops. The secretary of the Mysore Regeneration Council made the mistake of bringing up the issue of the land yet to be acquired for the project site, and was beaten down by several colleagues. There seemed little value in wringing their hands over a virtual fait accompli.
There's plans for heritage land. No, I don't know if it was a specific influence, but it did remind me of Julian Barnes's novel England, England, which in 1998, I think it was, he has this sort of fantasy idea of an English theme park on the Isle of Wight. And of course, in that novel, and I think in this one as well, it's a way of examining identity and commerce and how those two things can interact, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think this has always been the case, but I think it takes on a special tinge at the moment, given what politics in India is like. So, you know, there is a right-wing BJP government, which is bolstered by sort of various right-wing Hindu fundamentalist organizations. So, the narrative has very much become, in terms of everything, what kind of India are we looking at now? Who is it for? Who is it home to? Who are its sort of natural heirs, if you like? So this conversation has kind of been taking place for a while, but ever since Mr. Modi became Prime Minister, it doesn't seem to go away, and it seeps into everything. It's become like the culture wars in America, where everything is viewed through a prism of Tea Party republicanism or the other side, the Democrats. So I think in that context, a theme park which draws on ancient epics and kind of tries to create an idea of a certain kind of India it's sort of it's apposite, I think, and actually sometimes it feels like it's not that far from reality.
I mean, I didn't know when we would get on to Modi, but we seem to have got onto him quite quickly, but we might as well carry on with him. There was an interesting and much shared piece by Siddhartha Deb, I think, in the New Republic recently that got a lot of attention. It was highly critical of Modi, describing him, I think, as the anti-Gandhi. What is interesting about him, and we ran a piece last year in Prospect actually about Modi and looking at him. He does, as well as his obsession with modernity and financial advancement and economic growth, carrying up the sort of India shining rhetoric from previous administration. He's also, teaches his followers yoga and is very ascetic and very, it's very much the sense of this ancientness and modernity kind of fused together in a kind of weird amalgam.
And it's also his own personality, I think. I mean, in a country with, the kind of corruption that India has, epidemic on all levels, someone who, certainly on a personal level, appears to be clean. There never has been a whiff of financial scandal about him or anything like that. Someone who is clean in that way. You can see the appeal about someone like that in a political class that is so tainted across the board, regardless of party affiliations. There is something attractive about an upstanding man who has managed to, he used to be a tea seller, so he's come from very humble origins, not bolstered by the Nehru-Gandhi dynasty, for example. So there is something very appealing about a man who has managed, off his own back, to rise through the ranks, who is clean, who doesn't seem to enrich himself. And certainly that's part of his appeal, I'm sure.
But are you as worried as some Indians are, certainly as Siddhartha seems to be, about the way India's turning under his government?
Yeah, very much so, because I think it's this notion of dog whistle politics. We hear about it in this country too, where, we've seen it with the London Mayor campaign, where certain groups of voters are being told one thing and other groups other things. And in a country which is as diverse and complex as India, this kind of dog whistle politics is really, really dangerous, because you have people on the ground in smaller villages and smaller towns being told a certain kind of message, and we've seen evidence of that. There are text messages, because they use technology very well, a lot of these parties. So, WhatsApp is an amazing mobilizing tool. So we've seen the WhatsApp and text messages saying that, every Muslim in India has 7 children and their population will increase, will outgrow the Hindu population by 2050 or something. And it's kind of so absurd in a country with an 85% Hindu population. Yeah. But it preys on certain fears, and the message is very finely tailored. And there's not that much information. Media ownership is becoming more and more concentrated as well. So what you hear about what is actually going on is kind of a fraction of probably what is going on.
Novel was published, it was successful, it won a prize.
It
That
did
must have
win-
been
it did win
pleasing.
a prize, yes.
Then you've come up with these short stories now, and you've done it sort of the other way around, because a lot of writers write the
Yeah.
short stories and then either get those published or then are told you have to write a novel first.
Yeah.
But you did it the other way around. You wrote the short stories, in fact, after
Well,
you.
I only started writing short stories because I was waiting for the novel to be published, you know. It took a while, and, you know, the idea of starting another novel was kind of overwhelming because I hadn't sold the first one, you know, I was just getting all these rejections. So a friend actually suggested to me, well, why don't you try short stories? And I've always loved short stories, but, you know, they're notoriously difficult to write, and I always, I think I lacked the confidence to even try, but it felt like it's something that was doable, because if it didn't work, you could just give up. You hadn't really lost much. But then I found that it was really addictive because, you know, I mean, I've used this analogy before, but a novel can sometimes feel like you're in this kind of long and loveless marriage, you know, you're sort of trudging from month to month with these people. And I mean, sometimes it's great, but, you know, quite often it's not. And you're not quite sure why you're doing it or what the end result will be. And then, so after that somewhat bruising experience, the short story just felt magical because it just felt like a series of these really intense flings that, you know, if it wasn't working, you could just give up or, you know, enjoy it and then move on. And so there was a kind of intensity about that experience, which was great. So you sort of wonder, will I ever get back to writing a novel, you know?
There's long been a debate about to what extent literature's emerging from the developed world, particularly in India, are felt to be representative of the country in some way. So there was a famous essay by the critic Frederick Jamison in the 1980s talking about how third world literature, as I think he called it, somehow being a national allegory. And then there was sort of other critics who replied to him saying, no, that's challenging that view. It seems that the reception of a book, when people, certainly in this country, read about India or read books about India, do you get the sense that they really want to find out what it's like over there and somehow summing up the nation, or rather than simply reading a book with a set of characters?
I mean, I think they do, and I mean, I think we all do, in a sense that when we all reach out to books that are about somewhere else, you know, we approach them with a certain kind of curiosity about what is it like over there. So, I mean, I think that's perfectly natural, and certainly where this book is concerned, I mean, it is unintentional, but if I give it a title like 1.2 billion and tell people that each story is set in a different state, I mean, what else is going to happen? You know, it's going to be viewed, you know, necessarily as a sort of a snapshot.
To embrace that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I just went with it because my novel felt so local, in a sense. You know, it was the story of just one small place, and so this was an attempt at challenging myself, at just writing about other things, because it can get so boring writing about the same thing. And you have to give yourself permission to do that, I think, because it can be quite daunting.
I loved your story about the wrestlers. Do you want to tell us a little bit more?
Yes, thank you. There's a story about wrestlers. I mean, wrestling is a very old sport stroke art across South Asia, and there are these very traditional wrestling schools, only for men, which exist all across India with certain differences, but they tend to attract boys from quite poor families because they can make quite a name for themselves on the wrestling circuit. If they're good, they can earn quite a lot of money. And the inspiration for this was actually a series of images that I saw in I think it was a Sunday supplement to a newspaper. And someone had gone into these wrestling schools, which are called akhadas, and they had taken these pictures of these akhadas, and a lot of them are very old, and there is a beautiful light that filters through. So they tend to be earth pits, often enclosed, and there are high windows everywhere. These are the really traditional old ones, and the light just kind of comes through, and so these images were all of these boys and men of different ages. So some were the more senior wrestlers, you know, the kind of gnarled old beasts. and some of the very callow young fighters who just started, teenage boys. And so you had these images of, every kind of man and boy in these environments with the light shining through. And, it's a very closed environment. They live there, they work there, they train there. There's very little outside influence. It's that kind of pressure cooker environment that you sort of assume is in any of these sorts of schools, like a ballet school even. A friend of mine went to a residential ballet school, and everything she ever told me about being in a residential ballet school, I mean, you kind of think this must be what these places are like. They're intensely competitive. And there's very little outside influence. And then there's a religious aspect to it as well, because certainly in a lot of the Hindu schools, they worship Hanuman, and he is the god of wrestling in that sense. And it's about a certain kind of masculinity as well. Masturbation is evil in these places because a fighter's power comes from his seed. So the idea that your seed is being wasted, it's a serious thing. So I mean, you can't imagine a place full of teenage boys that this isn't going on, of course. But the fact that it's prohibited, I think, it's kind of very significant. There are all these taboos. And so it just leads you into a world of secrets and lies and exploration. And these are young men. So I was very, very curious about what might go on there. I mean, I've never been to one, but I don't think that should really stop you from writing about them. There's lots of stuff on the internet.
I'm sure. Interesting research, that one. That's probably a good point for us to end now. And I believe we have a performance that's coming up in a second, so I'll hand over to Jemima.
I'm going to invite Shobha Haridas now to perform a dance, and she's going to first introduce the dance, just saying a little bit about it. It's on? Perfect. Hi everyone, namaskar. When I was speaking to Jemima, we were talking about what dance to end this festival, and we've chosen a Tilana, which is usually the last sort of piece in a Bharatanatyam recital, and we thought it's going to be a fitting end for the whole literary festival as well. This specific Tilana is composed by Krishna Dasa, and it's in the ragam Hamsanadam and Talam Adi.
पङ्कजपादा कृष्ण कल